If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedmann.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Linda Cohen, also known as the Kindness Catalyst. Linda has been a professional speaker and consultant for more than a decade. She works with businesses and associations on the ROI of Kindness. Her second book, The Economy of Kindness, How Kindness Transforms Your Bottom Line, was actually published by Aviva Publishing. Yay! Linda is a member of the National Speakers Association and has served as the president of the Oregon chapter. Originally from New England, she lives in Oregon with her husband of 30 years. They have two spirited young children, or young adult children, and have raised three Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. Linda enjoys yoga, meditation, and a good cup of Earl Grey tea. Linda, it's always a thrill and an honor to interview one of my Aviva Publishing authors. And not only are you an Aviva Publishing author, but you're a colleague, you're a friend. It's like a triple whammy to have you here. Thank you so much for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Thanks you so much, Susan. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Linda, you are a two-time author, which to me means that you've had several years of experience marketing your book. Let's kick this off and just talk a little bit about some of those, through your years of experience marketing now. What has been a couple of effective book marketing strategies that you've used to promote your book?
Thanks, Susan. So to answer your question, I would say that with my first book, 1000 Mitzvahs, that one was published by a Bay Area publisher, and I worked with a marketing gal for the first 6 months of that book. So I learned some of the things that she did. I watched what she did to get me interviews in different cities that I was traveling to. I did interviews in New York City and Detroit and California and Oregon. One of the things we did was tie in my topic with something that was sort of seasonal. My book came out in November, so definitely was on shows around December and talking about kindness and gratitude. As the book continued, I began to realize that if I tied it into Mother's Day or Father's Day or some other opportunity, that was a way for me to be able to get on TV or get even in magazines. I know it was in a couple of parenting magazines in those days. I was a younger parent. I feel like there are ways to tie in your topic. It always has to be important for anywhere you're trying to market it. Why is their audience going to care about your book? I learned a little bit about how to make it relevant to the audience, which was a good thing because that's the biggest piece of marketing, I think, is why is this going to be relevant to a reader or to the audience or to the media person who's going to maybe bring you on?
Very much so. And I feel that you had a little bit more of a challenge because the whole topic of kindness, which I know both your books have been about, when you first started, I think it must have been a little bit more of a challenge to even get people to react to the fact that you're writing a book on kindness.
Yeah, my first book came out in 2011, and I would say things were definitely different there. My second book came out in 2021. 10 years later, the landscape had definitely changed. And, when my first book came out in 2011, it was very relevant to schools. Schools were really interested in my topic because kindness is something that is always important to children in schools. Houses of worship seemed fairly interested in my work. My first paid speaking opportunity was with Girl Scouts of America. I got invited to a luncheon. I remember doing a lot of things for nonprofits too. I think there was a tea I did early on in my business for a mother-daughter kind of nonprofit that served the community. So when it dovetailed with a nonprofit and their mission, then it was an easy sort of opportunity to talk about kindness. But you're right. I felt a bit like a lone wolf in the early days because I did feel like I was talking about something that people said, oh, kindness is a weakness and we don't want to talk about that. And I even got questioned in the early years in the National Speakers Association who might be interested in hiring me to talk about this. And in the early days, I didn't know. I just was so passionate about how I'd gotten into this work that I figured I was going to keep at it until it worked. And in 2014, when I started working more with corporate America, and now it's corporate international because I've worked all over the globe at this point, I really felt like businesses and leaders were much more willing in 2014 to talk about kindness and why kindness mattered in the workplace. And that felt a little bit easier to talk about. And then now, 2024, I have to tell you that literally every week on LinkedIn or in some other channel, somebody introduces me to somebody else who's talking, writing, speaking, working in this topic of kindness, or somebody will just find me randomly because I'm very active with my topic and the clients that I serve. So I think that that is definitely a shift. And I think that's showing while people are saying we're more divided, I think there's more people who don't want that to be the situation. They want to do what they can to help elevate kindness in the world globally. So that is reassuring to me as someone who's in this work. But I do think it has been interesting that the pendulum has swung more in the global world. People don't think they feel like as much kindness there. And then personally, I can say, yeah, but there's a lot more people who want to be talking about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm sure with COVID as well, that was an added element to the whole topic. I can see how the whole topic, I see it so much more than I've ever seen it before. You're making a stand there and you've made your imprint there in the marketplace. So that's wonderful. Let's talk about how you incorporate that theme from the book, obviously the theme of kindness, into your speaking engagements, because I know that speaking is a major part of what you do. How do you use the book?
I feel like there were two little questions there. My speaking work took off in 2014, and I knew I wanted to have a second book. I knew that it took a lot of effort to write a first book. And I think, Susan, I even called you and you talked me off the ledge. And you said, listen, there are a lot of ways you can write a book. And one of the things I remember you suggested was that I could record my stories and my chapters. And you said, if you can't sit in front of a blank piece of paper, go ahead and talk it out. But for me, I was already speaking and I knew that my 1,000 Mitzvahs book was no longer relevant to the corporate audiences I was serving. And I knew I wanted a second book that would be this opportunity for me to share the stories and the techniques and the tips and the tools and the resources that I was gleaning from my own work and from working with a wide variety of clients and in a lot of different industries. And so I wanted something that was a resource. That was my goal for the second book, was to be able to create that. And in all truth, I think your reassurance helped me, but the second book was easier to write for me because I did feel like I had something really valuable I wanted to put out and share. So I use the book as a secondary resource. I'm often in an audience for 45 minutes or maybe an hour, although I have a couple of programs now that are doing much more deep dive work into culture of kindness in a workplace. And I'm launching a brand new leadership training cohort as well this fall that will be opportunities for emerging or new leaders to be part of a cohort. I've done it with a couple of clients and it was so successful that I wanted to kind of create it on my own outside of a single organization. But I love using the book as a tool. And the book, I say, I'm going to get to talk to you for 5 minutes or 10 minutes about recognition. Read the chapter on recognition because there's other stories. And I feel like anytime you read a story about somebody else doing something, it might inspire you to do that same thing. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Oh, that's a great idea. Oh, we don't do that at our company. And I love being able to have those light bulbs go off, both in my audience and through the words that I've shared in the book.
Beautiful. Linda, I know that you've done a lot of work, especially as you said, with your first book, with the media. What kinds of things did you do and how did it help you?
I can tell you one thing I didn't do well that could help somebody else. One of the things that we did was we definitely marketed the book in various different states. As I mentioned, I only really did one national interview, but I did a lot of local interviews in a variety of states and a variety of markets. One thing I did not do, and I didn't really get told this till later on, is I didn't personally save the recordings anywhere that I had access to, download them onto my own platform at my computer or put them on a thumb drive or something. So when you are interviewed on television, it stays on their website for, maybe a couple of years, but at some point they're gone. My website began to have links that no longer were valid. And I didn't realize how sad that was going to be. And also, how hard it was going to be to ever have those kind of interviews replicated because, we did a bunch of interviews that were fantastic in television. I don't have any of those recordings from the early days, which is pretty upsetting when you realize that you've lost all that. I would encourage someone else who is a newer author and wants to get media, make sure you save your interviews somewhere that you have control over them.
One of the things that you said was that you did a lot of local media versus national. That is something that is so key because many people always look to the grass is greener on the other side, that there's the national, you've got to have national, but local media, they're so much more interested in you because they don't have access necessarily to what national are looking for. And I think the emphasis on saying, milk local media as much as you can. And people often forget that.
Two things I learned about that. Number one, those local medias were often tied to me doing a book signing event in their city. When I knew I was going to be in Detroit, Michigan, and I knew I was going to be doing a book signing there, at that point, I had seen what my marketing gal did, and I basically did what she did. I contacted the local ABC or NBC, and I said, I'm going to be in for a book signing, and is there a chance I can get on the morning show with the morning talk show host? And I was able to do that. And in Portland, I think I was on every station in Portland over the several years after my first book came out. But one of those local shows, Fox Television out here in Portland, put me in touch with the Fox Television in New York City that had a better TV show. I think that's what it was called, a national show, syndicated. And I got to get flown to New York by my publisher at that time to do that interview. The local interviews do expose you, and it's possible that the local interviews will help you get to the bigger media. And I will say one other kind of very, very cool story, which was there's the whole flow of books. You might ask me this anyway, but the flow of books into bookstores and just the opportunities of being able to get into the bookstores. And I know sometimes it's not always as easy to get the distribution as you want. And so I learned a little bit about that too, which was kind of fascinating.
Let's go down that avenue because, as I said to you, I springboard off of what you say. These are valuable tips because authors often say to me, how do I get into the bookstores?
Right. Well, I live in Portland, Oregon. Powell's Bookstore is a world-renowned bookstore. It's a city block wide. And my first book was published by a Bay Area publisher. And I don't think that she had much access to Powell's, but here I am, a local person. I live in the town. I've been shopping at Powell's for decades, and when my new book comes out, I basically decide I'm going to reach out to the whoever it is. And, you have to figure out who you need to talk to and tell your story and tell them who you are and why you wrote the book. And you've done all that work to create the book. So I did end up getting a Powell's author night to be able to go down. I actually didn't do it downtown. There's 2 locations and I got to do the one that was closer to my house in the suburbs. But it was so much fun. And it was so gratifying for me as a first-time author to be able to be at Powell's, and that feels like a little bit of an accomplishment, especially when you have not ever written a book before. Have a little bit of, what's a good Yiddish word we can use? Have a little bit of willingness. Yeah, exactly. To step out of your comfort zone if you really want to get your book into places that are a bigger bookstore. I would say that about both the bookstore and about getting on media. A bookstore needs books and media needs stories. Don't be afraid to pitch your story or yourself. And I feel like that was a good lesson for me in those early years of that first book coming out.
I really love that. The fact is, don't be afraid to pitch yourself. And I think that is often a stumbling block for people. It's like then the imposter syndrome starts sort of rearing its ugly head. Oh, how do I do that? But the fact that if you don't do it, who's going to do it for you?
Exactly. I mean, we all have imposter syndrome. Susan, when my first book came out, I had been a full-time stay-at-home mom for about 9 years. I did not think of myself. In fact, I have a story early on. I had started a mastermind group because I was a full-time stay-at-home mom. And I knew that I had taken on this project to honor my dad, to do 1,000 mitzvahs or acts of kindness. And I knew that I was considering writing a book about this. And I had a mastermind group because I said, I need support. I felt like an imposter, even though I'm educated. I had taken time out of the workplace and I really didn't feel particularly confident. I had this wonderful group of 5 other women and we had a mastermind group, and one of them hosted a conference. And I remember I'm at the conference and some other stranger walks up to me in front of my mastermind colleague and she introduces herself. Oh, Linda, what do you do? And I literally say, I'm just a mom. And my colleague just, she elbowed me so hard. And she was like, Linda just got a contract for her first book and it will be coming out in October. And oh, by the way, and she starts sort of telling her who I am. And sometimes we need somebody else to see in us what is possible because we don't feel or see it in ourselves. And so I love to tell people now, here I am 12, 14 years later, looking back at that Linda in 2011, and I'm glad that I kind of stepped through so many times when it felt so uncomfortable, because I think that's how I got to where I am now. But I also love helping someone else to not be afraid. Like I said, they need stories and they need books, and why not you? And if you can't see it in yourself, get somebody else to be your mirror so that you can see the bigger picture. And I think that's one of the things you and I probably both love about our association, the National Speakers Association. Certainly for me, when I joined as a brand new speaker and a brand new author, knowing people who were much further along in the journey always helped me learn and get better and buoyed my confidence.
That's where you and I met.
Yes, it is.
18 years ago. I can't even remember when that was, but the fact is that, yes, you were a first timer at the event and we got talking. One thing led to another. I've been around for many more years and I was able to introduce you to people. And yes, that is the beauty of National Speakers Association, that people are willing to just go out of their way to help you. You don't necessarily get work. People get the wrong impression. They think, oh, I'm going to join that association and they're going to find me work. That's not necessarily the case. Now, I have been fortunate enough, and I'm sure you too, that colleagues have introduced you to people who have hired you, but you don't belong to the association to get work.
No, I mean, for me, I belong to the association to learn the business of being a speaker.
Exactly.
And how do I get better at that? And in that way, people have been so generous. And I think you and I might have met in 2016, the very first year that I went. Because I think
the first year you were there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a while ago.
I know. I think it's a little bit fun, though, to have some perspective. And after I served as the NSA Oregon State Chapter president, I now feel like I'm the wise old person people are coming. I didn't mean to say that, but people are coming to me for advice because now my business is at a different place than it was when I started. So
exactly. And it's a sort of a pay it forward. You never know, but you're out there to help. Let's transition. I know that social media is something that you pay a lot of attention to. Talk to us about how you use social media, how it's helping you.
I am mostly on LinkedIn. I do have an account on Facebook and I have an account on Instagram and I repost there, but I spend most of my time on LinkedIn and I use it in a couple of ways. I will reach out to people prior to a speaking engagement if I know if there's a board of directors or if the person who hires me, just to be sort of already in the company of the people that I'm going to be speaking to. Sometimes I'll use it as a way to ask a question, especially because my topic is about kindness in the workplace. I might say in my introduction, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to find out if there's some kindness that's been happening in your company or business or association. I usually like to start with that. And then that becomes a great springboard afterwards. And of course, we should always have our contact information. Maybe we invite people to join our newsletter and we immediately get a way to connect with them. But I have found that LinkedIn is just also a place to be authentically myself in both my speaking business. I have had a social media gal who was in her 20s. She said, do the behind the scenes of what it's like to be a speaker. Like she always loved when I would do anything when I'd be out doing a keynote, taking pictures behind the stage or any other way, because I think she was always thought that would fascinate people. But also just some seasons are harder than others. And, I lost my mom to suicide. And I feel like I'm going to just be fully my authentic self, both as a person and as a businesswoman on LinkedIn. And I have found that I have connected with really amazing people, even people that I've never met in person. And maybe we've had a phone call because we've met on LinkedIn. Then we have a way to have a real face-to-face, even though it's, virtual meeting. And then there are the people that, I've met in person and I keep in touch with. I actually had a client tell me recently, I had spoken at a conference in 2022. They were at that conference in Nashville. They're here locally in the Portland area. And because of my social media, and they've been sort of following me on my social media for 2 years, they wanted to hire me to come to their organization here in my town. I feel like social media can keep you and your message and what you're trying to share with people really in front of them. And I've always said I use my social media for good. You will never see me post a story. There's plenty of places you can get the bad news that's happening in the world. That is never going to be what I want to do. So I'm trying to share really great stories, and also the stories that somebody will say, because this is like my favorite phrase, when somebody hears a good story and they want to share it because they read about somebody, oh, that restores my faith in humanity. So it's kind of my
that.
Yeah. Restores my faith in humanity.
You're using it in a sense as a research tool, especially for an engagement that you have that, as you said, you do a little bit of research about the organization through LinkedIn. How about actually getting business? Now, you said through occasionally you've gotten something, but is there a formal outreach, or is it just through your stories, your sharing, that people connect and think they would want to hire you?
I don't necessarily do my first outreach through LinkedIn. I might follow someone who is in an industry that I speak in. I might connect with them and ask them to connect, but I may do an email with them to actually introduce myself and ask if any of my work might be relevant to them. It varies so much. I don't probably have a system as dialed in as many people might. My system is to be authentic. If somebody posts something that really intrigues me, I might link into them. Or if somebody reaches out to me and hasn't written anything, and by the way, if you're going to be on LinkedIn, send a personal message when you link into someone. It's like, I would rather know, oh, I saw your post on whatever, and it made me really want to connect to you. That's always the kind of way I like to introduce myself. So I prefer when people do that to me. So if they don't, I say, what on my profile made you want to connect? Because that's what I'd like to know. From that, definitely continuing a relationship in some capacity with other people. Now, as your amount of followers or people you're following grows, clearly it's hard to manage something that as it grows over 5,000, 10,000, whatever. But from that, you will definitely find seeds of real connections that have happened. And I have been introduced to work opportunities through people that I have met on LinkedIn, whether it was a random link to me to them or them to me, or we've built a relationship because I'm commenting on something they're talking about, or they're in an industry that I'm really interested in. So I'm going to continue to build relationships around our shared passion. And some of that has led to work too. My outbound marketing is generally a little more email based, not necessarily LinkedIn based.
As you said the word random, I was like, random acts of kindness.
Yeah.
So it's almost like.
And I like to say intentional acts of kindness. Let's do intentional
acts of kindness. And that's a beautiful segue, Linda, for you to tell our listeners more about how they can connect with you on LinkedIn or buy your book. Or
if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm Linda M. Cohen. And please tell me that you heard us on Susan's podcast. I would love to know that that's where your interest in connecting happened. My website is Linda Cohen Consulting, because I do keynoting and I do consulting for companies around building cultures of kindness. I would love to say that if I get a LinkedIn or an email from anybody who's listened, I would love to gift you a copy of my new book. It's not so new anymore. It's been out a couple of years, but The Economy of Kindness, how kindness transforms your bottom line. And I'm happy to give away 2 or 3 books. If I get more than that, maybe we'll figure out a way to give more. But I'd love to be able to gift that to you if you link into me or reach out to me in any way. That's how people can get in touch with me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. That's so generous. Again, those intentional acts of kindness. That's beautiful. I love it. Linda, as you know, we always end up asking our guests to share a golden nugget, some words of wisdom. What would you like to leave our listeners with, Linda?
That's so funny. I told Susan before we started recording that this year, in the last 3 or 4 months, I've started leaving bite-sized kindness tips on my website and on LinkedIn. And this morning, I didn't sleep in past 5 a.m. So in my head, I was already saying, okay, today's bite-sized kindness for myself, which I should record about, maybe I'll write about, maybe I'll post about it, is actually how valuable a power nap is. And this is not the first time I've written about it, because I have been a fairly religious power napper for decades, since my kids were little. Now they're in their 20s. I had a guided 15-minute meditation, which turns out to be yoga nidra, that I got somehow years ago. But I put on sound blocking earphones, and I usually put an eye shade on, and I do about a 15-minute reset. I've been thinking about that for people who work outside of their home or outside of a setting, or they're in a corporate. Could I still do that if I worked somewhere outside of a place where I have a bed? And I would say absolutely. You could sit in your car. You can maybe try to find a comfortable chair. Maybe you find a patch of grass and you bring a towel if it's the nice weather. But I recently, a few months ago, I was traveling on a 2-day training. I had not slept well. And the second day, I was really falling apart. And I said, I need to have my power nap. And so I ended up laying down on a hard, cold wooden floor with my jacket. But I did have my earphones and my eye shade. And it was just enough for me to have, I don't always fall asleep, but that few minutes. And so my golden nugget is, I think our world is overwhelmed. And I think most people are probably sleep deprived. And I think that could be leading to some of the horrible things that people feel in the world about being overwhelmed and not peaceful. So I think we all need a nap. I think that's my
I love that. I love it.
So you've heard it here first, and I'm going to probably end up putting that on my LinkedIn soon.
Beautiful. Yes, it's just like inspired me. Maybe I should go and have a nap now.
You definitely should. 15 minutes can really do a world of difference. So
I love it, Linda. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. And it's just wonderful to have you on the show. You're a very special person in my life. And also that you're an Aviva publishing author. That just is almost like the cherry on the top. And listeners, you know the drill. If your book isn't selling the way you wanted or expected to, let's you and I jump on a quick call together to brainstorm ways to ramp up those sales, because you've invested a whole lot of time, money, and energy, and it's time you got the return you were hoping for. So go to bookmarketingbrainstorm.com to schedule your free call. And in the meantime, I hope this powerful interview sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. Until next week, here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.